What if living in a relationship with God isn't castration? What if it isn't like the surgical removal of the very drive and instinct we've ever had as men? What if instead God wants to enter a relationship with us in which he meets us exactly where we are as men? These are the words of today's guest, and we welcome Stephen Mansfield on to the New Kind of Man podcast.
Hey man, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, it is our pleasure. And just in case you have been living under a rock, Stephen has authored just so many different books. I wasn't even going to count how many books that you've authored, but I know I've read a few. And the latest book that we're going to talk about today, Men on Fire, is just a fantastic read. So I thank you for that advanced copy, and it's been helpful. And I can't wait until the men get this in their hands.
Great. I'm excited about it. I really am. It's a book I think that is more timely than I could have intended.
Hmm.
Obviously, with what we're dealing with in our country, reigniting the fires in the souls of men is a theme, especially the specific fires I talk about that we've absolutely got to return to. So I'm grateful.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Stephen, you also have the Stephen Mansfield podcast where you talk about some of the same themes that you write about, whether it's in your biographical works or Mansfield's book of Manly Men, which was a fantastic, fantastic book. And I've gone through that and referenced that many times with guys in my circle. So I just want to say thanks for that work. You have really been a mentor to me from a distance for years now, and thank you for your faithfulness.
Well, you're very kind. I've been very fortunate to have good publishers and good people around me, good agents, all that kind of thing. And so all the books that I've written for men have really taken off and had an impact. I'm really grateful for it.
Hmm.
Something important's happening in our world. I'm glad to be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things I like to do with somebody who I consider very influential and successful, I always like to go back to just kind of looking at routines. So I was wondering if you could just kind of tell us what your morning routine is, and then as a follow up to that, I would love to know what it looks like for you to write. I mean, of course, this book is different than your biographies. There's some reference to some biographical work that you've done, but first question is, what is your morning routine? And then the follow-up would be, what does your writing process look like?
Well, let me blend those two because my morning routine's a little bit different on the days that I write. But everybody writes differently. I actually coach some writers, and so some guys have the ability to start their day, write for an hour, go to a meeting, come back, write for another hour. I can't do that.
Hmm.
So for me, writing a book is a lot a matter of managing the calendar because I write all day when I write. So for me, the best analogy I know is to say that when I'm writing, it's like getting a 747 in the air.
Hmm.
You don't get a 747 in the air to take a 30-minute flight, right?
Yeah.
So I get up in the morning, I spend time with my wife, have breakfast, I spend about an hour in prayer every day before I write. It's just my normal routine. It's my normal prayer time anyway.
Hmm.
And then I usually work out in the morning. That gets the blood flowing. And then I start writing about mid-morning. And I will write all day. My wife can interrupt me. Nobody else can. The phone's off. And I'll write until about 5 or 6 in the evening. Normally about 5 o'clock, my wife starts screaming at me to come out, just humorously. And so I'm writing. I might get a sandwich, but for me, writing is about getting the plane in the air and staying there in that optimal, altitude. So I can do that for a couple, 3 days, and then I need a break. So I won't write more than about 3 days in a row. On the other day, that's the day I'll use for travel. That's the day I'll use for meetings. The fourth day or so, or I might, if I'm really under a pressure deadline, I'll work on the book. I just won't write. I'll research, I'll edit, I'll do something else, conduct interviews, do something else to break up the writing mojo. So that's how I do it. Now I know guys. I mean, I had a constitutional law professor who wrote naked on his back porch. People have all different ways to write. I know some people. I mean, one of the most famous political commentators, P.J. O'Rourke, writes in a busy DC bar. Everybody's different. Some people write all day. So, Hemingway used to write 500 words a day and go fishing. So everybody's different. But for me, it's a matter of laying out those days in advance on the calendar, breakfast and workout, write all day. and then land the plane in the evening. And I can't, like I say, can't do that more than about 3 days. And that's worked for me. I've done now about 26 books in my life, and not dead yet. So I'm good.
Oh, that's awesome. I know that men all over the world look up to you just as I do, and they see you as just somebody who's guiding them and leading them. And I did some research, and I loved your response when I don't remember what the exact question was, but it was somebody asking about COVID and how to handle it. And you use these words from scripture from Hebrews 12:7, which I thought were very insightful. And I haven't used this scripture as a reference, but I've used this idea multiple times in people that I've talked to. But these are the words that you gave. You said, endure hardship as discipline. Of course, straight scripture from Hebrews
Sure.
12:7. Why did you say that?
Well, in those simple four words are a couple of very, very important ideas. God, in saying those words to us, is urging us not just to look at the hard things that happen to us as random bad things. You know, the nasty bumper sticker that says, poop happens.
Right.
We've all seen that on cars. Well, that's a philosophy that will produce depression and not allow you to emerge and improve during hard times the way you should. God is saying, look, see hard times as something I'm personally using.
Yeah.
I'm your coach. I'm Lombardi. I'm working you through your paces here. So
Mm-hmm.
hard times shouldn't be seen as just accidental things that just fall into your life and it's random and poop happens. No, endure the hardship as discipline, meaning somebody's disciplining you.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody is working you through your paces. So that's number one, the fact that God is involved and God is using it. Second of all, it's the idea that my attitude ought to be one of training. Not only am I recognizing that I have God as coach through this hard time, but I'm also recognizing that I'm in training mode. So as I go through coronavirus 19, um, I'm asking what's possible here. What is God trying to work on? Am I meant to deepen with my wife? Am I meant to become more specialized and expert at body weight exercises?
Right.
Am I supposed to drop some pounds? Am I supposed to read more? There's a lot of things that could be happening. How am I supposed to do this? We all know that in some cases we're actually deepening relationships. I'm talking to people by Skype I haven't talked to in years. But now we're having regular meetings and drinking a Diet Coke together. So all of that to say, that training mode, that attitude towards it, and then of course there's the implied assumption that when we go through hard times, we're being trained for a purpose. No training happens just abstractly. You don't just train just to train. We
Right.
train to be better when you actually are put in the game. So I'm assuming, especially in the situation where we are, sheltered in place, and a guy like me is able to be just a little bit less effective, because I'm not on stage, I'm not on television, that kind of thing. There's going to be a time of release, and then I'm being trained for that better moment. So I always have my eye on what's coming. I always have my eye on how am I going to be used on the other side of this. So those simple four words really do shape how I go through everything.
Mm.
I'm being prepared for something. Even I haven't had any major health crisis, but we all know people who on the other side of a cancer diagnosis and then the treatment, when they emerged, they were better, stronger, wiser, deeper,
Mm-hmm.
more powerful, what have you, more engaging. So that's how I understand almost all hardship that comes into my life, and I'm really grateful for those four words.
Yeah, it's a very helpful way of looking at many aspects of life, right? Because sometimes I think guys and guys who would be listening, maybe that they've endured some of their own hardship, and maybe it's the inconvenience of what we're going through with the pandemic, but maybe it is a diagnosis, maybe it's just a relationship, with somebody who's just rocky. And I think the tendency is, if somebody's a shallow man and lacks humility, they would just kind of push that all aside, and their ego would puff up. Instead, what this verse and what you're advocating is, hey, everything happens for a reason. So even maybe you think the other person may be at fault, or you think something else is at fault, or politics are at fault, there's still something here for us to learn, rather than feeding the ego and thinking that we're the untouchable one.
Yeah, and you put your finger on an important thing too. As we all know, a huge number of people have responded to this crisis by griping about somebody.
Right.
Well, I have some influence in DC, but I can't change the whole international direction of this thing.
Right.
I mean, Governor of Tennessee is a friend of mine. I can't even particularly direct, 100% what's going on in Tennessee, where I'm sitting right now.
Hmm.
My point is that we griping, externalizing the whole thing, placing blame, that misses the whole direction. What does
Mhm.
God say to Stephen Mansfield? Endure hardship as discipline. Big boy, he's saying to me, your focus is on what I'm doing in you, how I'm training you, what I'm preparing you for.
Mhm.
Yeah, help where you can, advise where you can. I've spent lots of my last 4 weeks on Zoom, leading teams, advising Congress people, all that kind of stuff. But the
Mhm.
main focus for you, Mansfield, this is from the Lord, my words from the Lord. The main focus for you is to improve as I direct you. See, so it shifts my eyes from the blaming and the anger and the protests and all that stuff. I mean, I'll protest if I have to, but this is not a situation where I see that as being beneficial. And many people are going to emerge from this coronavirus situation more bitter and 20
Mhm.
pounds heavier than they went into
Right.
it. I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be that way. I want to endure hardship as discipline. So anyway, that's another benefit added on to what you were saying, because we want to have our eyes on the right thing.
Yes. And that implies change. And one of the quotes that you use in the book Men on Fire is this, and then I'll just kind of jump into some aspects of the book. You say this, that fire comes when change happens. It occurs when the right combination of elements takes place and a transformation begins. So it is with your soul. And so that implies change. Even the same thing about discipline and enduring hardship as discipline, there implies change. It's God is using this to change me or to change us. Because I think even, and I don't want to have this whole conversation get lost with the pandemic, but I also think that there's something about our social fabric of our country that God is touching right now. And it's a nerve that I think that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. And let's bear in mind, as you and I both know, manhood in general was in decline before this thing came along.
Hmm.
I actually see this virus situation as an opportunity for men to do the dramatic upgrade that many of us have been calling them to anyway.
Yes.
So I don't want to say in some crass way that I'm grateful for all the suffering and the death because my message is somehow propelled. That would be vain
Right.
and empty.
Mhm.
Grieve for what's happening in the world, but everything is an opportunity for men to improve.
Mhm.
And so I think that you're putting your finger on a very, very important point. And that is, there were already upheavals happening in our society. There are already things happening. Men were already in decline.
Mhm.
And this is a chance for us to make a difference. The
Mhm.
physics of fire are that fire happens when a change takes place. Actually, a physician told me, a guy who's an expert in physics, said that actually fire is a condition of change. And so
Mhm.
I'm calling men to change all the time. And in
Mhm.
our society, basically, our generation, our society, the philosophies of our age, and the way most men live, douse the fire of our souls,
Mhm.
shut down the passions in us. In fact, we're actually told these days, and even as early as elementary school, that our passions are wrong and are bad, when they might be misdirected, but they shouldn't be shut off. So
Mhm.
most men have had the blowtorch of their souls shut off.
Mhm.
And of course, what I'm trying to urge them to do is bring it back. And I quite frankly think our society is going to need good, righteous, noble, principled men who are on fire like never before. So I'm
Mhm.
really grateful this book's coming out during this time.
Yeah, as am I. I can really sense just the urgency of this writing. In the other books that I've read of yours, I love them. They're fantastic reads. You're a great author, but this one just seemed, even from the forward with Scott Hamilton's forward, all the way through the book, I just sensed a deeper urgency. What was driving you to write this book at this time?
Well, it's a combination of things. It's not only what I'm seeing in society, because my two books have prompted men's events around the world,
Hmm.
and I'm very grateful for that. But as a result, I've spent a lot of time talking to guys. I like guys' events because they're not the high political kinds of things and university kinds of things I usually do. So I'm more down with the guys. We're eating burgers, we're talking. It's not so
Hmm.
much the elegant banquet and all that kind of stuff. So we're really talking. And I see that men are in crisis. I see they have tremendous needs and tremendous challenges. But the bottom line is that they're hungry to see the fires restored in their souls. They know that something's wrong. They know that something's not going right.
Hmm.
And so the urgency that you refer to in the book is two things. First of all, I've hung with men and I can see that they are desperate. I know something shut off in my soul. I know it's not going right. I want to pass something great on to my sons. I know my generation needs me. The other urgency for me, quite frankly, is that you've identified me well. I am a scholar. I have a doctorate. I wrote my early book a bit more from a reflective place, sitting quietly, writing, helping guys think through things, telling historical stories, things like that. My smaller book, Building Your Band of Brothers, was just kind of a supplement for that book. But by the time I got to Men on Fire, I felt even more urgently about the situation because of my time with men. So it was a change in tone for me as a writer. Stephen Mansfield's two guys. I can be the quiet scholar, reflective thinking, and then I can be the guy who's just hammering it, just absolutely going at you. And I needed to be more the second mode in this book, Men on Fire. But also because men were begging for it. Men sensed that I had something more fiery to say, and they were grateful for, like you've said, like you are, for the reflection and the thought and the breadth of Mansfield's book of Manly Men. But you could tell they wanted me to just whip out my blowtorch and set them on fire, and that's kind of what I've done in this book.
So then you titled the book "Men on Fire." Just it
Exactly.
makes it's apropos, right? So let me ask you this before we jump into kind of just segment this out per chapter. What does it mean to be a man?
Well, I believe that to be a man means that you understand that God made you as a man, that this wasn't a choice you made, this wasn't a biological accident. God made you to be a man. And with that comes a lore, a craft, a way a man ought to be that God has ordained. When King David turned to his son Solomon and said in the King James translation, "Show yourself a man," he was saying, live out the ways of a man, live out the meaning of what it means to be a man, using your gifts for the good of others, using your physical strength, using the power of your words, using your strategic abilities, using your ability to bond with other men, stand guard in the community, things like that. All of those things that come to the fore. So for me, being a man means understanding the purpose of God for your manness, for your maleness, for you being a man, and then walking it out and teaming with other men for the good for the glory of God and the good of society, as well as, of course, those you love. That's my shorthand definition of it. And doesn't mean don't touch that, which is a lot of people, a lot of men's ministry is all about getting guys not to touch themselves and stuff like that.
Right.
My attitude is, if I can inspire you to gain a vision for what it means to be a good and a great and a noble and a righteous man, then all the other stuff falls off. If you'll get captured for the vision that God has for you as a man, you'll lose weight. You'll stop looking at porn. You'll stop being an idiot in other areas. You won't drink or eat too much. You'll bond with other men. You'll treat your wife and kids well. You follow what I'm saying? I don't have to go through and scold you for everything. So my approach, I'm tagging on the question here and just getting a gripe off my chest. My approach is not one of chastising men. Most men know what they're doing wrong. They just don't know what to do right. And when you teach them what to do right and who they are in God, then they'll drop off all that other crap and start living noble lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I view really this and what you're saying is just kind of connecting with something that I read in one of Dallas Willard's books. I think it's just some ancient philosophical idea, but it's VIM, vision, intention, means. And first you have to give the men a vision. You have to give them a vision of something greater than themselves. And it needs to be so, in my opinion anyway, it needs to be so vast and so expansive and so overwhelming that they realize they can't do it themselves.
Yeah.
And that they need God to infuse them to go do the things that are so compelling, and that they would realize their smallness and then the bigness of God, the power of God that's needed through their life. And then the intention is with kind of, you actually said this earlier, but so the intention, I think, of every man is to work out that their masculinity, their maleness is for the glory of God and the good of the world. And ultimately, I think these two things can be North Stars. I realize there's only one North Star, but these can be North Stars for us to direct us.
Yeah, and I got to tell you that's why I think most men are miserable in our generation. They know they're made for something more. They can feel what scholars would call the argument of design. They can feel the press of inside of them. I'm made for something more. I'm not sure what it is. And if you haven't had a father in the home, or you haven't had good men around you, or you haven't had models or a place of faith to go to for somebody to model righteousness for you, what a man ought to be, well then what do? You hang out at the bar, you drink, you kill the pain, you send your life into a tailspin.
Right.
So I think most men in our generation are unhappy exactly because of what we're talking about. They don't know what they're made to be.
Mm.
But I'll tell you what excites me is when I'm talking to guys who are just the kind of dogs I've been describing here, and when they catch a vision
Mm.
for what they're made to be and what it can mean and how they can do it with other guys, and how it's not just a big old message of don't touch that, but it's a message of live boldly and passionately and live
Mhm.
more fully who you are. And there's actually going to be more adventure, more battle, more of being of the greatness that you feel like you're made for. Well, then I'm telling you what, they catch fire. And
Mm.
it's exciting to watch. But I think the misery factor in our generation, even the high male suicide rate, is a lot because guys know they're made for more and they can't find it either socially or in their own souls. And
Mhm.
that's why I feel this urgency about what I'm doing.
And unfortunately, even within the church, I think within the church, this should be the place that men can find freedom to be themselves, to express themselves, and to be men. Not
Yes.
to be effeminate, but to be men. And I know that you're a proponent of this because I've read your work and listened to your podcast where you've talked about this too, and you're passionate about it. So, why do you think that the fire of righteous manhood is maybe dying out, or it's about to die out?
Well, there are a whole bunch of reasons for that. There are cultural reasons for that. Currently, of course, there's the anti-masculinity mode of scholarship and of
Mm.
certain writers and so on. And I have to say that a lot of that is because we haven't had a noble culture of men to bring the young up in an understanding of who they are. The fact is that men are born with these passions, men are born with this fire in their heart, but it's often misdirected. So if you've
Yes.
got a 10-year-old boy and he's tearing the house down, well, what's mom, what's the teacher, what's the psychologist going to think? Well, this is
Mhm.
bad. We got to turn this off. We got to get this kid drugged. We got to get this kid, coached out of this passion. Well, what he needs actually is for guys like you and me and 1,000 others, 10 million others, to get around him
Mm.
and say, okay, buddy, I understand why you did that. I understand why you did that. But let me explain what that really is in your soul and how that really ought to be channeled, and why pounding your sister with a hammer or whatever, I don't mean to make light of that because I'm sure it's happened to some people's pain, but
Sure.
that kind of thing happens. I can tell a story very quickly.
Mm.
When my son was 13, the police brought him into my office. I was a pastor along a big, busy road in Nashville, and asked me and told me that he had been laying in the road at night. He was supposed to be waiting for me in the car. He was laying in the road, this busy road at night, saying how close he'd let the cars get to him before he jumped up and ran to the curb. Well, now on the one hand, everybody in his life, his mother, his grandmother, they wanted to send him to military school. They wanted to drug him. They wanted to put him in a straitjacket.
Yeah.
But I knew, because I had, thank God, a little experience. I knew what that meant. This guy was wanting to go up to a new level of manhood. He was wanting to challenge himself, to put it in the
Yeah.
vernacular. He wanted to see if he had a set. And
Yes.
so, all that to say, I disciplined him. Obviously, he was disobeying, and I mean, obviously, we had to do a little corrective work there. But I also realized this guy needs more wildness in his life. He needs his father a bit more.
Mm.
We don't need to be playing touch football. We need to be playing tackle football. I need to be sitting with him a little bit over a hamburger and explaining what manhood is. What's going to come next is the sex drive and all that kind of thing.
Mhm.
If he answers that the way he answered that desire for wildness in his soul, he'll be impregnating half the women in the world. You understand my point? We
I
have
do.
to be there to coach and mentor the young men.
Mm.
And so all that to say that that's what I think but that's what makes the difference, is that we're there to guide the development of these passions. So our society just says it's bad, turn it off. And when you combine that with the socioeconomic situations with men, the stats. Men are declining in almost every category:
Mhm.
life expectancy, academic achievement, earning, all of it. And it's because we've lost who we are as men. We're being told by society that men can't function in an information age. And then, of course, we're also choosing to respond to all that in a way that just deadens the pain and even causes more damage. So, you're asking me why that's going away. It's going away because we've allowed it to, and
Mm.
we've got to restore a culture of noble men who teach other men and teach the young how to handle what's going on in their souls. It's actually good. It's actually good. You see two brothers or two friends out in the yard pounding the heck out of each other at 8 years old. Half the world's going to say they need to be put in jail. I go, great. Here's a coaching opportunity. I'm
Yeah.
glad they're alive. I'm glad they're passionate. I'm glad they're living as males. That this is normal. Males have been doing this since Adam.
Yeah.
So let's coach them into how to use their passion. But you don't go out there and say, stop that. You're now, You're now imprisoned in the house, for
Right.
16 weeks, and don't ever talk to me again about this. I mean, that kind of thing. So there's a way that we can coach the passion out of guys rather than dousing it, and that's a lot of what this book is about.
Yeah, and some of what I think that you're referring to, Stephen, is the wildness of maybe what
Yes.
you talk about in Mansfield book of Manly Men, which I think is really interesting because I don't know if it's that book or some of maybe what Brett McKay's doing at Art of Manliness, but uh, I don't know. I don't know who it is, but I just see this influx of interest in people like Theodore Roosevelt, like Winston Churchill, people from of old, from a century ago, and then looking at these people as being kind of pillars in of masculinity and working that out. And I think that even in that the increase of interest in these people from history, whether it's again from you, your work, or Brett, I just think it's remarkable that now you see this whole influx of interest of and men looking for permission. I think the reason why they're looking at these people historically is because they're looking for permission.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I got to tell you that part of the issue is that we have to now be intentional about things that used to happen automatically. If you were born on the frontier, if you were born in an earlier age, you worked in the fields, I am Native American, so I'm not picking on Native Americans, but you fought the natives, you fought the Indians, you laid the tracks, you raised the steel in the cities. You had a challenge, you had a battle, you had to work. People, good heavens, we're going through a bit of a pandemic now, and it's a serious thing. But in 1918, 670,000 Americans died of the Spanish flu worldwide, almost 100 million. Think
Wow.
about the battles they fought in those generations. My point is that a lot of what caused concern about manhood, for example, in Theodore Roosevelt's life, is that the frontier had closed. You no longer had the Wild West. People were living in cities more, and so men were more domesticated. He was concerned about a loss of manhood. Well,
Hmm.
that's even tripled now in our society. A guy can grow up almost entirely in front of the television with ice cream in his hands and never have a challenge, never have a battle, never have anything he's got to fight. So we
Hmm.
have to choose to do it. It doesn't get thrust on us. We're not born in a cabin on the frontier with battles and hard work and muscle building, manhood inducing kinds of things all around us. We have to choose to do it. So men have to choose to bond together. You have to choose the controlled violence of sports. You have to choose to be challenged. Just me, right? I work out right here in the office that you're seeing behind me, and I do it with body weight exercise. But it's such a challenge, and it kicks my backside so much that it causes all that manly stuff, all the biological stuff, and all the intellectual stuff to zoom to the fore. I'm choosing to push the boundaries.
Hmm.
Even the guys I know who are 90 and are doing mall walking every week, back when we could walk in the mall, and it'll come back here soon.
Hmm.
They're challenging themselves. They're pushing. They're choosing a fight. That's we have to do it intentionally, because it's not going to happen automatically. But that's a lot of the importance, I think, in our generation, is that men realize that if they don't choose it, they'll end up sinking into all the things that we see going on now. And so, yeah, I think you're right. Roosevelt and others are their words, their thinking, their philosophy is coming to us because we're pretty much in the same state, but we're worse off. And I just finished a book by Roosevelt, I'm very challenged by what he said. And I think we have those fathers, and we realize that what John Eldridge wrote to all of us in Wild at Heart was very, very valuable. We need a battle to fight. We have wildness within us that's got to be controlled, but it's got
Hmm.
to be channeled at the same time.
Yeah, and some of this, I think, in the permission is, we look for what you talk about in one of your chapters. We're looking for heritage, being
Mm-hmm.
empowered and lifted up by the wisdom of the past. And I think that we have a responsibility too, generationally. I think that
Yes.
you and I, your platform is a worldwide platform, so you have a lot of weight and responsibility that goes with that. I have a platform with what I do and the people in my circle. So
Sure.
I have a weight and a responsibility. And I think that just as we look at somebody like Theodore Roosevelt, and now that's 100 years has basically lapsed between his life and then now in current day, more than 100 years. And I think that we have an opportunity and responsibility to shape the next generation, so we don't have to have a lapse of two generations to have an aha moment when we face another crisis of manhood.
Yeah,
So
there's no question
heritage
about it.
is
No
a big
question
part
about
of
it.
it.
Yeah, there's just no question about it. There's that famous African proverb that if we do not initiate the boys, they will
Hmm.
burn the village down just to feel its warmth.
Hmm.
And so that's what's going on in our society. Look what's happening with young men, everything from ISIS. I do a lot of work in the Middle East, and we're very in touch with what's going on with ISIS, to street gangs, to all the things that are going on, even to the fact that 20% of the girls on American college and university campuses are sexually abused. Well, who's doing that? Untethered, unprincipled young men who haven't been fathered, haven't been taught how to handle their sex drive. So you're absolutely right, and this is a lot of the challenge that we deal with in our generation.
You talk about Winston Churchill, and I've heard you reference him several times. And in the book, you reference him in the heritage section, which I really was kind of hoping that you would be able to speak into the fact that we look at Winston Churchill. If you just look at him from history, you say, "Wow, he did very significant things," and is known historically in the 20th century to be one of the best leaders
No
at,
question.
at all. And yet, one of the things that if people really do a deep dive into his life, they see that his upbringing was far from spectacular. And in his heritage, we remember him in such a way, but he walked through a lot of pain. Could you speak into that?
Yeah, that's one of the themes that I write about whenever I write biographies, is looking at people who achieved great things, and we know their greatness and we know their successes, but we don't tend to know the hardship they went through that usually was the price of their success. Uh, Churchill was born to an aristocratic family in England, but his father frankly hated him. His parents neglected him, sent him off to what we would call private school here in America. They call it public school. And his father neglected him. His father would make a speech at a building right next to Churchill's school and not even visit it. We're talking about an 8, 9-year-old child here.
Wow.
Churchill was a stutterer. He was chubby as a child. He had a lot of challenges like that. And quite frankly, his father's neglect of him and harshness haunted Churchill his entire life. He had depression problems his entire life. In fact, when he was staying at the White House during World War II, when he was the Prime Minister of England, he asked not to be put in a room with a balcony on it because he was afraid that at night a depression might hit and he might be tempted to throw himself off. Now,
Wow.
that's what was going on at the time. In fact, he reported having visions of his father almost until the day he died. That his father would appear to him, he said, and would haunt him and taunt him and tell him that he wasn't anything and that he hadn't accomplished anything. We're talking about Winston Churchill here.
Yeah.
He also had a lot of suffering in his life. He had a child die in infancy. 2 children drank themselves to death. One of his children committed suicide. I mean, it was tough, tough, tough. But he mastered the dark night of the soul. He got through it. He held on to core values, even with his father, whom he could have chosen to respond to for the rest of his life after his father died, with bitterness.
Hmm.
Churchill said, "No, I'm going to live out his unfulfilled legacy." His father, Lord Randolph, made some stupid decisions in politics and got sidelined. So Churchill, when his father died, said, "No, I'm going to live out his legacy," and saw his entire grand political career as living out the unfulfilled portion of his father's legacy. In other words, he chose not to respond in bitterness. He chose to respond with faith and with a sense of heritage. So all of that to say that hardship and suffering, and this is good for us to know right now during coronavirus, hardship makes us better when we go through it the right way.
Hmm.
And my entire book on Churchill details a lot of the hardships and suffering that Churchill dealt with. It really was one nanny who was a Christian, who made up for the love and the warmth that he did not get from his parents, told him he was chosen, told him he was called, introduced him to the Christian faith, taught him the lore of the British heritage and also the Christian faith. And when Churchill was escaping a prison of war camp in South Africa during the Boer Wars, all that came back to him in the form and shaped him for the rest of his life. So anyway, it's a fascinating story, but the core lesson is that hardship does fashion greatness.
Wow. Yeah. And I've been really compelled to him just because of some things that have happened in my childhood too. And the idea of heritage and it just hints of legacy too. To me,
Yes.
it's of wanting to give. I mean, my son just got married last Thursday. So wanting to, for years, his whole upbringing, wanting him to have something better than what I had.
Yes.
And to kind of walk through that. So I would just ask you this. We've kind of talked around heritage, but how can a man do this today?
Well, we are made as men, and I think as human beings, to live our lives informed and energized and shaped by something that comes down to us from our family line.
Hmm.
And not just our family line, but our people group, our heritage. So that can start broadly. I'm an American, so I can be inspired by the generations of Americans who came before me. Um, but I also have a heritage as Stephen Mansfield. My father was a decorated Army officer. My grandfather was an Army officer, paralyzed temporarily in the assault on Berlin during World War II.
Wow.
Just speaking of the military heritage right now, I had relatives in World War One, relatives fought in the Civil War, relatives fought in the American Revolution. So I'm just using one sliver of my heritage to say that even if these men weren't great parents, even if they weren't wealthy men and successful in business or whatever, there's something in that heritage. There's something in how they sacrificed themselves. There's something in that military lore that can take up residence in me.
Hmm.
I tell the story in the book. I don't mind telling it in about 30 seconds right now, of a man, friend of mine, who's Hispanic. And when he looked around in his family line, he became very successful, by the way, in business. And he said, I want to do something. I want to build on my heritage in some way. Well, he looked around. There was nothing. I mean, there was nothing. I mean, he saw immigrants. He saw disease. He saw early deaths. He saw alcoholism. But he did have one relic. His father was in prison. So a guard, when his father died, urged him to consider that his father had actually worked while he was in prison to earn money to give to the kids who came to visit their fathers in prison. So every Christmas, a lot of kids would get Christmas gifts that this father in prison had earned by doing whatever extra work they do in prison to earn money.
Wow.
So my friend said, well, that's it. That's the one thing I'm going to build on. That's the heritage. I can't find anything else in my heritage from anywhere else in my family that's worth building on. But that one thing about my father, that he was a generous man who took care of children. And my friend does not want me to use his name when I say this, but he has started a massive charity, many, many, many millions of dollars,
It's
that
awesome.
is based on that bit of heritage. So I understand what he's done now. He's gone back and he's gone through the dunghill of his past, his words, not mine. He's found the one gem that he can find, and he's built something that's going to be carried into the future based on that heritage. So I challenge men, find the things that are powerful and noble from your past. If you're Hispanic, maybe it's your father, or maybe it's the greatness of the Latino people. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? You don't have to just look at migrant farm workers who maybe have troubled lives and say, well, there's no heritage there, like some guys
Right.
do. Find the beauty of it. Find the greatness in your father. Even I know a guy, a friend of mine, father was an alcoholic, had problems, got arrested, but did a couple of things that my friend said, that's my heritage. I'm going to make that part of my life.
Hmm.
Or maybe the mother's an awesome woman, or maybe the grandfather was something amazing, or you know what I'm saying? You find the gems, you find the inspirational stories, you find the things that you want to have take up residence in you, and then pass on to the next generation. So let me see if I can do this. If you can see this, you won't be able to see it well, but there's a picture of my father, an Army officer,
Hmm.
right over my shoulder. It hangs in my office. My children come and see it. My father was a decorated Army officer. Well, he wasn't. He was a fair father. If he was sitting right here, I'd say that he'd be nodding his head. There's no tension between us. But his life, his career, being a Purple Heart awardee, etc., that stuff takes up residence in my life.
Hmm.
And also other things that he did. So every man, I challenge every man in this book to find the gems in his past, his race, his ethnicity, his family line, even his nationality, whatever you can draw from the past that is ennobling for you. And by the way, don't just limit it to your own thing. I go to an all-black church in Washington, D.C., my other home, and I tell them all the time, kind of humorously, hey, Martin Luther King Jr. is mine. I don't care. I'm a normal white man, but he's mine. He's mine too. And we all laugh about that. I'm just joking with him. I'm not going to let you have him. You know what I'm saying? Like
Actually,
today is,
he's mine because
he's,
he
yeah.
actually preached his first sermon here in my city.
Oh, that's great. Well, own him, and draw from that heritage. Isn't that great? For example, the day on which we're recording this is Queen Elizabeth's birthday, her 94th birthday. Well, I admire the Queen very much. I'm probably going to do some writing about her and her Christian character and so on. She's mine. I got a lot of British friends. I do a lot in England. I get up there on BBC and I say, guys, she's mine. I'm sorry. If she'll have me to, whether she has me to Buckingham Palace or not, she's mine. What I'm doing is I'm just saying, whatever of the past that I can allow to take up residence in my soul that ennobles me, I'm made for that. And
Yeah.
in an age when families are often challenged and broken and so on, you can go beyond your immediate biological family or perhaps find something great even within that devastation,
Hmm.
that will take up residence in your soul. So anyway, I talked that through in the book, and I think it's an essential part of men. Men need to feel themselves as an extension of something that has come before them.
Yes. You know, that actually inspired me to really start thinking whenever I read that in the book. That really just kind of put me in a place of, I mean, it's so easy to think of negativity and dwell on it, right?
Yes, yes,
So
exactly.
for me, as I pivot to talking about the battle, one of the things that came to mind whenever I was reading that part of the book was my mom. For instance, my mom died tragically. She took her own life, and
I'm sorry.
and thank you. And so it's one of those things. I can live the rest of my life and saying, well, I'm a victim of this, and I can have the pity party, and I can, I've gone through the stages of grief, and all of those things, right? And I can just blame her, and I can be mad forever, and nobody can say anything about it, right? Once you say that, in like, I don't have to defend myself again.
Right.
That is the card, trump card. But instead, once I read that in the book, I was like, you know what? I'm going to look at this differently. My mom was incredibly compassionate. She served others her whole life through. I'm going to look at the span of her life and I'm going to say,
Yes.
what about her life could be lived out as a legacy in mine? And what about my life what about her life needs to be passed down to my kids? And they need to remember her as saying, no, 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 don't remember her last moment. Instead, remember the years before that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. My mother did not have the tragic tale that yours did, but my mother died early as an alcoholic. Now, she was
Mm,
beautiful. She was a model. Even at the age of 63, at which she died, she was a model.
mm,
Absolutely beautiful. She just drank to the point that her body weakened, and she died of an embolism. Well, now I can choose, like you in a more severe situation. I can choose to be embittered or just write her off because she died an alcoholic, but her life prior to that was absolutely amazing.
mm.
And what she embedded in me of books and literature and love of history, and almost every day I live out her legacy, whether I'm thinking about it or not.
Mm.
So that this is the art. What you and I are talking about right now is the art, and I'm so proud of you for having this tragic story, and you're not ignoring it or somehow living in denial, but you're
Mhm.
reaching behind it to bring good things into your life. And this is not just a mental game that we're playing.
Right.
This is about heritage. My father was a busy military officer and really didn't have a lot of time for his son. I knew he loved me, but he was not the kind of guy who would have put his arm around me and say, "I love you and I'm proud of you." But I chose, just like Churchill, to go back and find the great things about him and bring them forward. And so
Mhm.
my kids now, it's just automatic for them. They live. I am Colonel Eldon L. Mansfield's son, a grandson, granddaughter, Purple Heart winner, Medal of Honor, et cetera. I mean,
Mhm.
they just bask in it. But I know, and of course I'll tell them, but they're not listening yet. I know, what I'll tell you right now is that I didn't create that legacy, but I definitely was the conduit between generations. It would never have naturally gone to the next generation. And my father was of that generation where he wouldn't even talk about his military career. So my brother and I had to go research it after he died. And we went, oh my gosh, he fought in that battle and he was in this and he did that. And so then I started telling my kids about it and putting things on the wall. I'd always been proud of my father, but it was like being proud of Patton. He was kind of like distant, removed.
Mhm.
But I brought that home. And my daughter, is up in New York battling the coronavirus situation. She doesn't have it personally. Her company is shut down temporarily. They got things to deal with. But she thinks about her grandfather's influence. And she said, if granddad lived through what he lived through, I can get through this too. I mean, she's living that out.
That's
Jesus
awesome.
in one hand and grandpa on the other hand. You know what I'm saying? And
That's
so
fantastic.
that's what a heritage does.
Yeah. And I think this preps us, right? This preps us in one way anyway. I mean, we've talked really about a sliver of heritage and it could be very, very broad, I realize.
Sure. Sure.
But this preps us for the battle. And we as men, if we're going to be men on fire, we have to be engaged in the battle. Where does the battle begin?
Well, the battle begins in realizing that, first of all, you're made for battle.
Hmm.
It helps men a lot. I mean, from a young age to understand that battle is an important part of who we are. But there are many different kinds of battles. And I personally think that some men who aren't taught the proper way to use their strength and to engage in the controlled violence of sports, et cetera, are
Hmm.
inappropriately being violent at home. A guy who hits his wife, first of all, is an idiot and needs to be dealt with. But also, it's very likely he's doing that because he doesn't have other channels that are constructive and healthy for how he should deal with that strength. Um, I get all of my yayas out regarding all that stuff, playing touch football with pro football players in DC. I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, I take a smacking because I'm not near as good or big as they are. But I'll tell you what, when I come home, I wouldn't abuse my wife just out of on principle, but
Right.
definitely don't have any unused energy,
Hmm.
to go after anybody. So my point is that we have to realize we're made for battle, and not just physical battle. There's spiritual battle. There's emotional battle. Right now, for example, Bev and I are in our home here in Nashville. There's a battle for the culture of our home. We got to be careful not to let the news dominate us. It seems like some
Hmm.
people in the press, I'm not anti-press, but some of them just want to specialize in predicting disaster and standing on the rubble of Western civilization and saying, I
Right.
told you so. So you got to guard the culture of your home. We tell each other the positive stories, the positive statistics. We're both reading books about historic figures. I'm reading a book right now about Queen Elizabeth, big old 700-page book. And I tell the positive, inspiring, humorous stories to Bev. We fill our home. We battle the negative. We battle the darkness. We battle what's going on in our society in that way. There are many different ways you can battle, but a man's made for battle. And I think it starts by when he first once looks at his buddy, kind of like that scene from Braveheart where the two little boys wrestle each other. When you first start duking it out with another guy, you say, that's great. That's what you're made for. Let's talk about how to do it constructively. So you're not, putting each other's eye out or tearing out mom's kitchen, that kind of thing. And
Hmm.
that, I think, is where it begins. And that requires other men in their lives.
So how does a man declare war on himself?
Well, first of all, he's got to have an understanding of what's good and what's bad. You don't want to have him battling the wrong things. Like I said earlier in our interview, you don't want him battling the stuff that's good about him. The fact that he's got vision, the fact that he's got passion, the fact that he's got a heart that's passionate about certain things, the fact that his soul is lit up by certain stuff. We got to make sure to teach him right so that he's not trying to turn those things off. That's what's producing all the couch potatoes that we've got who call themselves men now.
Hmm.
But the other aspect of this, of course, is that he realizes that there is evil that comes for him and evil that arises in his soul. I'm a Christian man. I'm a man who wants to be a good man. I want to be an impact in my generation. I'm aware that I can eat too much. I don't know where you are in alcohol, but I'll just tell you, my wife and I, a glass of wine almost every night with dinner. I've never had an alcohol problem like my mother, but I guess if I can have one glass, I can have 25, and then I'm destroying my life. I mean, in theory, that's possible.
Hmm.
Um, a guy who's a passionate man can also be violent. He can also be angry. He can all, we men are given by God powerful words, the power in our words. Well, I can use that to destroy my wife's soul. I can go in there right now and trash her with my words, or I
Hmm.
can her up and make her feel like the most amazing, beautiful woman in the world, which of course she is. And so uh, all of those things involve a level of battle. I have to battle for control of my words. I have to battle to manage my eating. I have to battle against, of course, we all know the lust and the
Hmm.
temptations and the, what have you, and then the good-looking girl at the hotel, or as we're walking through the lobby or whatever. We all have to battle things all the time. And so, if you teach a man battle, and you teach him that battles range from, yes, the most fundamental physical battle, wrestling on the floor, all the way to high spiritual battles against the kingdom of darkness for the purposes of God, against the forces that come to take your community, etc. Then a man is fully engaged. If we don't teach him any of that, and he's just feeling a surge to beat somebody up, well, that suddenly becomes the drunken brawl at the bar with the drunken driving episode afterwards that can literally ruin his life. And so
Hmm.
that's why I think it's essential we talk about battle, so we give men a GPS for what's going on in their souls.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really helpful perspective for men, and there's permission there for men to go out and do the things that
Yes.
men are supposed to do. And what I found is there's many men who they don't have permission, and then it's resulted in this is really spurred from a conversation I had yesterday with Paul Cole, who I know that you I think recently had a conversation with him
Yeah.
too. And I asked Paul the question. I said, so what do you think? He himself is influential throughout the world. And I said, is there a common thread that really plagues men throughout the world? And he said, men are soft.
Yes.
And I think that with what you're saying in what this really the core of this book, it gives men permission to battle, and knowing that if we're going to be in battle, that means we have to firm up things that are soft. whether
No, there's
it's
no question. No question.
physically, spiritually, relationally, intellectually, we can't just be passive, because I think that the passivity in our culture uh, is the thing that's leading into this softness of masculinity.
Yeah, and I think that men don't need to be hammered for that initially. I think what we have to do is help explain to them what's caused them to be that way. I mean,
Yes.
again, bear in mind that if you're about, I don't know how old you are, but if you, let's say you're 16 right now.
Hmm.
I mean, I know you're older than 16. I'm just saying you and I are older. But if a guy is 16, it's very possible he's been in the house where sitting on the couch is half your life, right?
Yes.
There's nobody saying, get up and go out and throw the football. There's
Yeah.
nobody suddenly grabbing him by the shirt and throwing him on the floor and wrestling him. I got a 3-year-old grandson. When he comes, he's going to be here later today at our home. When he comes in our home, he goes and says hi to BB and kisses her. That's his grandmother. He
Mhm.
turns to me and gets in a crouching position and growls because we are on it, baby. We are beating up bad guys. We are hassling each other. We're smacking each other. He's jumping on my back. He's 3 years old. So what I'm saying is that's a natural part of who he is.
Mhm.
And so I think that he's not going to grow up in a situation of softness because obviously he's got fathers and uncles and
Mhm.
grandfathers and all kinds of folks who are going to be around him saying, come on, let's do this.
Mhm.
But the average kid in America today doesn't have that. One of the saddest statistics I know, I've got some medical doctors who advise me in what I'm doing with men. And they talk about a thing going on with young males called gynecomastia. Well, gynecomastia is what's happening because of a sedentary life, junk food, video games, prescription drugs, all kinds of things. Many young boys' bodies are starting to produce breasts. They're actually producing the kind of breast material that young girls have.
Wow.
And I know surgeons who have had to remove what would be, I'm not trying to be unclean here, but the typical ideal American breasts
Mhm.
from 17-year-old boys. Now think about what that boy's been through. But his body, it's almost like a prophetic cultural statement in a sense. His
Yeah.
body is producing girl stuff just because of his sedentary lifestyle and feminine ways. So the very things that we might applaud in a girl, he's not got going on in his body. Well,
Mhm.
this to me is a statement of what's happening in our society. So men need to understand their. But I'm telling you, the average 16-year-old kid might not even know he's made for battle. It might not even know he's made for challenge. I had a military father in the home. I'm telling you what, as soon as I was old enough to be thrown to the floor and wrestled, I was. And what I found awakening in my soul was awesome. I used to try to whoop my father. Now he was a special forces Green Beret. There was no way that was going to happen, but I still was committed to go after him. So all that to say, we've got to awaken that thing in men's hearts. And by the way, if a different kind of kid who's not a couch potato feels, as we've said before, those passions for battle, those desires, those fires. Well, most of society is telling them to turn them off. But
Mhm.
that's why we've got to have a culture of men like you, me, and 10 million others to say, hey, it's a good thing. Let me tell you how to handle it, right? It's like the way you coach a young guy before he gets married. Hey, sex is a good thing, but there's some stuff you got to know. Not
Yes.
just plumbing questions, but some stuff about a woman's psychology and what goes on and what
Mhm.
she needs. And you can't just walk in, strip, and say, let's do it. There's ways to woo, there's ways to love, there's ways to romance. You got to study your wife and find out what she likes, what her love language is. So
Mhm.
all of what we're talking about is the lore of men we need to be teaching. And I'm not just saying 12-year-olds, I'm talking about teaching this to 80-year-olds. I've
Yes.
had 80-year-old men become Christians and jump into our men's movement and go, oh my gosh, I didn't know any of this. And suddenly their marriage, their grandparenting, their parenting goes to a whole new level for the last 15 years of their lives. So you can learn this stuff at any
Mhm.
time in your life and begin to make a change.
I had a gentleman actually say probably about 5 years ago. Yeah, I think it was 5 years ago. He came into my office and he said, "I'm mad at you." And I was like, "Well, you're mad at me." I was like, "Well, you've been mad at me before, so I guess I'm just going to put this on the list." And he said,
Sure.
"I'm mad at you," and I didn't realize he was being serious but also playful. And he at the time was about 85.
Mm,
So no, excuse me, about 83. So he came in and he said, "I'm mad at you." And I said, "Okay, why?" And he said, "Why didn't you tell me 40 years ago what you told me last week?"
yes. Yes.
And that's a great example of that. But yet somebody who was eager to learn and eager to grow. And and did so accordingly. So,
But the good news, I'm sure you share this idea with me. The good news is when a man embraces a righteous philosophy, a righteous vision of what a man's meant to be, the turnaround can happen quickly. I've seen entire family cultures of a man in middle age completely get turned around, and things just start to change, and children start to be loved and achieve, and wives start. I mean, I've seen women who were angry and pudgy and, you know, all the things going wrong in their lives. I'm telling you, I see them 18 months later. I go, what in the world happened? She'll say, Bob changed. Bob started loving me well.
wow.
Bob started chasing me around the house. Bob started getting me out there for a walk. Bob started, romancing me. Bob started loving the kids. Bob started creating a culture in our home, and she would say, I later read your book and realized why he was doing it. But and so Bob at 55 changes the culture of his entire home, changes the trajectory of his kids, changes everything. And now you're looking at like a dynasty coming out of Bob's life. But at 54, he was a failure in
Yeah.
every way. All it took was that he realized who he is as a man.
Wow. Powerful. Well, I think that you are, no pun intended, going to light men's souls on fire when they read Men on Fire. And it was a fantastic book. Is there anything else? I realize we've only been able to really dig into a couple of really chapters and ideas here. I feel like we could go for probably hours and hours, but for the sake of your time and mine, I won't. But I will give you an opportunity. Is there something that you really feel passionate about that we need to cover before we're through today?
I do, because of the times we're in. If you just let me have one quick second, I
Hmm.
want to say that my study of history, and of course other historians beyond me, confirms that when you come out, when you get to the other side of a season like we're in, plague, world wars, global depressions, etc., that there's a great flowering of the human spirit.
Hmm.
You have great creativity, you have great literature, you have great scientific investigation, you have great market activity. So uh, we want to go through this in such a way that when we come out of the cave, so to speak, that we're ready to be of impact. I think men are listening to this podcast, watching it, and they are excited to be great and noble men. Well, I want to tell you that the age in which we're about to live is going to be an opportunity, a time of challenge, no question, but it's also going to be a time of opportunity for us to really be of impact by being the true and noble men we're made to be. And so get ready for that. Get ready for that. Don't just live in reaction to forces. Don't just live politically bitter, but realize that you were destined for this. And that when we get to the other side, if we go through it the right way and we allow all the processes, all the discipline of God to happen in our lives, that we really can be of massive impact and begin to approach the kind of greatness that our forefathers did as the part of the greatest generation, those ancestors that we admire and write books about. We can approach that kind of greatness if we'll approach this crisis and the season that comes after it with the nobility we're called to. So we'll get through this. Let's be great on the other side.
Yeah, amen to that. Completely agree, and I'm with you. So let's charge the men up to do this, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Appreciate the time with you. And I appreciate what you're doing.
yeah, well, thank you very much for coming on, and I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's a privilege for me to have this conversation with you personally, but then also to work together to spur all of these men to be great men. So thank
That's
you, Stephen.
fantastic. Fantastic. Appreciate it, man. Good talking to you.